Day 3 was dedicated to the Louvre, the largest museum in the world and arguably the most famous one. In the morning, we woke up early so that we could reach when fewer people were there at the Louvre. And when we got out of the metro station, we had this grand view of the entrance, and the sky, the morning sky was beautiful. The walk leading up to the unmistakable pyramid surrounded by the three wings of the Louvre, which of course was once the royal palace, was going to be a memorable one. As I've mentioned in the previous episodes, when you wake up early and go early in the morning to the monument or the palace or the art gallery or the museum you want to see, there are fewer people usually. Something I should have mentioned in my Versailles video itself, please try not to carry big backpacks when you go to art galleries and museums. The smaller the bag, the better it is, and please don't carry cigarettes or lighters or your Swiss knives, etc. So back to the Louvre again. We walked around, we were taking the view in, really enjoying ourselves, and we went to close to the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, built to commemorate Napoleon's military victories. It is not to be confused with Arc de Triomphe at the end of Champs-Élysées. On the top of Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, you will see Peace riding in a triumphal chariot, the quadriga. So we walked around this monument, made some nice images of it, and started walking back towards the pyramid, and we saw how the sun had set the pyramid on fire. It was a glorious sight. Then we walked towards this statue of Louis XIV on a horse, and I saw a pigeon grooming itself on the head of Louis XIV, and after a minute or so it took a dump on his head, and it was absurdly brilliant a moment, because at the end of the day, hey, no matter what you've achieved, enough to have statues of you erected centuries after you're dead and gone. All it takes to remind us humans of our own place in this great world is for a pigeon to take a dump on your statue. So when we saw a couple of people forming a queue at the entrance, the pyramid entrance that is, we decided to stand in the queue. I have an unpopular opinion to share here. I'm not a big fan of I.M. Pei, the architect who designed this glass pyramid. Of course, this juxtaposition of modern architecture amidst the three wings of an ancient Parisian palace, it's one of the most recognizable and popular architectural marvels in the world today. Anyway, that's just a very, very personal opinion. So the entrance to the museum was pretty dramatic, I must say, and there are three wings in the Louvre, Richelieu, Sully and the Denon wing. Since we chose not to see things in chronological order, we chose to go to the Denon wing first because that's where Mona Lisa is. Since we were among the first 5 people to enter the Denon wing, we wanted to sort of get it over with, because you know how crowded this room that is home to the Mona Lisa becomes after a while. So we did go, and we were really, really lucky to see the Mona Lisa from as close as we possibly could, and we even had a minute to take this customary picture. We also took an Instax picture with the Mona Lisa, and in just a minute or two the room was already crowded. The Louvre is home to more than 380,000 objects and more than 35,000 works of art. So you can imagine it's a joke to dedicate just one day for the Louvre, especially if you are a fan of art and history. However, we had 5 days in Paris, so we had a list of things that we wanted to see no matter what, and we would spend the rest of the time consuming as much as we could. Of course, if one's lucky, one can live in Paris for a few weeks or months or a year or two to just be able to witness all these amazing things that span pretty much 10,000 years of human history. But yes, we were audacious to see at least the things we wanted to see no matter what, and I guess it helps to sort of do a little bit of homework, some research to kind of make a list of things that you want to see no matter what. If you have a few favorite artists, if you want to see a few things that belong to particular civilization and so on. And of course, if there are things and works of art that belong to different times in human history, you can imagine the amount of work that goes into it relentlessly day after day in terms of research and documentation and so on. And bless all these people who work in the museum to make it what it is today in the world. Although there are many other great paintings by Da Vinci, that Italian maestro who was a genius, it's interesting how the theft of the century made the Mona Lisa all the greater. Again, at this point, I have an unpopular opinion. The Mona Lisa is not really my favorite Da Vinci painting, and in a few minutes I'll talk about why it is so. Before that, on the other side of the room, on the opposite wall, there is a great, massive painting. It's unbelievably large. It occupies pretty much the whole wall. It's a Venetian painting, The Wedding Feast at Cana. While people were pouring into the room in a frenzy to see the Mona Lisa, we took a good few minutes to take a good look at this painting, to go through all the details, because there was so much going on. It's a very humbling experience, to see all these great paintings from so close, sometimes only from a few inches away, and to imagine those great artists, painters who stood a few inches away from these canvases that were once empty, and who with a few brush strokes made the paintings what they are, the stories that they wanted to tell, the symbolism of it all, and the passion and the time which is life itself, that they pour into it. It's a very inspiring, very moving human experience. As soon as we entered the Denon wing, although we were among the first 5-10 people to enter, we were walking fast, and we happened to be the first 2 people to climb up the stairs that led to the winged Victory of Samothraki, or the Nike of Samothraki. The beheaded sculpture with its missing arms and tautly spread wings was all the more haunting because it was headless and armless. And although the entire head was missing, it just spoke volumes about humanity and all its victory and vainglory, all the contradicting forces. The Greek had mastered sculpture, no doubt. I mean, someone like Michelangiolo was inspired because of the way the Greek sculpture had mastered human anatomy. And this work of art from the Hellenistic era is one of the many evidences of the Greek genius. Also, it is known that Greece is now wanting this sculpture back. Perhaps it's only fair. This is kind of a riddle for me, most of these works of art and historical sculptures and artifacts do not belong usually to the country that they are in today. And there have been all these talks going on, including India for that matter, countries wanting their sculptures, their paintings back. I'm very curious to see the consequences of these conversations that are happening. Anyway, coming back to Nike, the goddess of victory, she is alighting on the bow of a warship, and the place chosen in the Louvre for this particular sculpture is incredible, because you will see how the sculpture is in conversation with the space it inhabits, that rather abstract relationship between the statue and the space. And being the first 2 human beings beholding this glorious Greek statue that particular morning, we were incredibly grateful because it was a luxury. And now, as we were to enter another large room in the Louvre, I want to talk about that one painting I had been wanting to see for the longest time. In fact, this painting was one of the first ever that took my breath away when I was a little girl and sort of initiated me to the phenomenon of painting in the human world. I wanted to see Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatii, and there it was, the original, glorious and huge. It is so realistic. It's as if you were in that very room witnessing those men being carried away by their zest for self-sacrifice for their country, and on the other side, starkly contrasting, are these women who are weeping because at the end of the day, there is no winner in the war. I'm not going to share the story behind every painting because that's going to take forever. And a lot of you out there who love art and history probably know a lot more already. And I just want to say that the internet is still a great place if you know how to find the credible resources to learn from. And there are these amazing YouTube channels by some professors and art lovers and experts. Pretty much every famous painting and every famous sculpture or statue has a ton of videos made on it. So once you start on that journey, there is no looking back, and learning becomes such a fun process. And coming back to this great room, which also had other great paintings, was just a fantastic beginning of our journey in the Louvre. When we were walking out of this room, we saw that there was a cafe there inside the Louvre at the end of this room. And since we had woken up really early that morning and hadn't had breakfast, and we were going to spend the entire day in the Louvre, we knew we had to grab a quick bite. Of course, it's not really advisable to do this, to have food inside cafes and art galleries and museums, because it's really expensive. However, we chose to have a breakfast here, although it proved to be really expensive because it was really time versus money for us. We really did not want to waste time getting in and out of museum multiple times every time we felt hungry. So we had a rather solid breakfast. It was delicious, worth every euro we spent. While we were enjoying our breakfast, we had this map of the museum with us, and we were seeing if we could add a few things or keep a few things for the next time. Also, we saw many different versions of the David and Goliath story depicted as paintings. Michelangelo's sculpture, David, is one of our favorites. I have made a video about Michelangelo's David. If you're interested, you can watch it on my YouTube channel. I'll leave the link in the description box below. The next sculpture was on our list of things we wanted to see, and it's Psyche revived by Cupid's kiss. I mean, as a hopeless lover of love, I've been obsessed with this sculpture ever since I got to know about it first, and I cannot thank Mr. Antonio Canova for this piece of beauty. And although this part of the museum was really crowded by this time, we were thrilled to have managed to make some really nice pictures, and I wanted a photo with it, and we managed to get one as well. Then we moved on and saw something that we weren't prepared at all for, and that's the Veiled Woman. I remember both Santosh and I gasping the minute we saw it. And this beautiful sculpture by another Antonio Corradini, is so beautiful. It was an unexpected joy for us, and I'm just so grateful that we saw it. Next, you see here is a sleeping Cupid, as adorable as a sculpture can be. The way its mouth is slightly open and the way his hand is on the quiver, which is filled with arrows, is just so adorable. And then we saw this really haunting St. John the Baptist's head on a platter after his beheading. And apparently this was mistaken for Michelangelo's work for the longest time. And then we saw the Christ child playing with a nail. This is also something that we did not know about, and it was such a heartbreaking thing to see, the child Christ not knowing that he would actually be nailed on a cross one day, playing with a nail. And another heartbreaking thing was the way we humans can invent gods and invent stories of innocence for those gods is a really moving detail. With this thought lingering in our minds, we moved on to another great piece of art by Michelangiolo. This is The Captive, or The Dying Slave. You already know by this time that both Santosh and I are really obsessed with Michelangelo. We've been talking about it for the past few months, pretty much relentlessly, but there is a reason, as you can see. Then it was time for this opulent gallery. Now, this is where you see the crowns and the jewels and everything royal that once belonged to the French aristocracy, and it was also very reminiscent of the Hall of Mirrors, which is in Versailles. We spent a lot of time here gawking at those crowns that belonged to Louis XV and Napoleon, among others, and the ceiling was beautiful and artistic and luxurious. Much of this gallery was destroyed by a fire in 1661, and Louis XIV ordered it to be rebuilt, and it's as glorious as you can see from these pictures. The famous American-British author Henry James is known to have said these words about the gallery, which is really famously, sumptuously decorated. And despite having the map of the museum in our hands, we still got lost and wandered off to another room full of Greek sculptures, and boy, were we grateful, because we ended up seeing another sculpture that we wanted to see, and that was Venus de Milo, another Greek sculpture from the Hellenistic period. Venus here is armless, just like Nike, and it's equally haunting. Apparently, there is no consensus among sculpture experts about what the original statue with the arms might have looked like. There are only speculations. This and the Winged Victory, that is Nike, were moved to a palace during the Second World War. Thanks to a visionary director then, at least we have this much remaining of these glorious Greek statues today. And then we saw Eros, of course, the god of love. It was pretty ironic and also pretty sad that the phallus of this god of love was missing. But even vandalism hasn't stopped this Cupid from his share of joy, as you can see on his face. Then there was the god of Hermes, Mercury, fastening his sandal. Then there was the statue of Athena, which is a replica, I repeat, a replica of the Athenian sculpture. And how gorgeous is this? It's from 430 BC. And just like Nike, the way this statue has been placed in the museum is just gorgeous, the relief in which it stands. Watching this statue, I could not and still cannot get over the fact that a lot of artists cared so much about even replicas, the copies of some of the greatest statues, sculptures ever made. So after the Denon wing, it was time for the Sully wing, and funnily we ended up reaching it after getting lost again, despite having the map in our hands. And we were in a frenzy because there was still so much to see. We had to see the artifacts from the Egyptian era and behold all the works of art from that time. We did that, and of course we had to see the Sphinx, which is again beautifully placed. And although it was crowded, we did manage to get a good look at it. Then we got back to seeing more paintings. We saw a portrait which was pretty much alive, made by the Italian master Raphael. This portrait is of an Italian writer and diplomat. Then we saw a few paintings by Reni, including the Hercules, the Purification of the Virgin. Then we saw a couple of Paninis, including the glorious musical celebration during the wedding of a French prince and a daughter of a king of Poland. We saw a cardinal visiting St. Peter's in Rome, and a favorite, the gallery of views of modern Rome. I mean, how glorious is this painting of a gallery which has more paintings in it? Then we saw this absolutely gorgeous but a sad painting by Rossi, which is the martyrdom of Saint Agatha. The legend is that she refused to worship pagan gods, and for that she had to have her breasts cut off with pincers, as infuriating and painful as it sounds. Then there was a rather sad painting called The Tears of Saint Peter by Maino, and the emotion came through, that of a defeated human being. These paintings really speak to you in a very different, visceral way, because it's not just a postcard or a picture or a video anymore. You're standing in front of the original. And then it was time for Leonardo da Vinci, that genius of a man, once in a millennium kind of a human being that ever lived and walked the face of this planet. Here was the portrait of a woman of the court of Milan. Honestly, I've admired this portrait more than the Mona Lisa. And then we saw the Virgin of the Rocks. Then there was Saint John the Baptist, and this next one happens to be my most favorite Da Vinci painting. This is Saint Anne, the Virgin Mary, and the infant Jesus playing with a lamb. It's also just known as Saint Anne. You can see the pyramid-like placement of the main subjects, the three human figures in this painting. The details are exquisite and painfully intricate, and there are some really amazing videos about this particular painting. My favorite one is made by James Payne of the YouTube channel called Great Art Explained. Please follow that, it's highly recommended. There is also another YouTube channel called Smart History, which is run by two art historians. And of course, there is Rick Steves. In this room full of Greek sculptures, we also saw something amazing. There was a bunch of students who were sitting on the floor trying to copy this beautiful sculpture of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, aka Diana of Versailles. There was also a teacher who was giving some guidance to some students who were struggling. Just imagine saying, "Hey, I have a class today in the Louvre." How exciting. Another sculpture we were aching to see was this beautiful Hermaphrodite sleeping. This is by the maestro Bernini. It's a favorite. The way one leg is in the air is one of my favorite details. There is such innocence to this sculpture. We lingered around this one for quite some time. By this time our feet were throbbing and we wanted to rest. Luckily there was some space next to the statue where we could sit and relax for a bit, watching Hermaphrodite the whole time. Then there were the three graces, goddesses of vegetation and beauty, who happen to be companions of god Apollo. The scale of some statues here was stunning, and then we moved on to see some beautifully carved and painted wooden sculptures, and there she was, another lady I wanted to behold, Mary Magdalene. This has been and will always be a favorite. I can kind of relate to having long hair like that. There was a time when I would sit on my own hair. But of course, Mary Magdalene is close to my heart because of her story. By this time, we were exhausted and were starving. So we had to break for lunch, and we ate inside the museum again, which is not really wise, but again, to save time. And after lunch, it was time for the Richelieu wing. Now, This is a wing about which we didn't know much. There wasn't really a particular painting or sculpture that we wanted to see that was housed in this part of the Louvre. So when we entered, everything was just spectacular and surprising. We hadn't even seen a lot of videos that were made in this part of the Louvre. It's beautifully curated. As soon as we entered, in the first few minutes, we saw a man drawing on a black notebook with his white pencil. He was engrossed in his sketch. And because we didn't know much about this wing and just beheld everything in awe, and now, of course, it was time for souvenirs. There is no way you can afford all that you want to buy. Of course, that's a given. But just watching the souvenirs itself felt like visiting a museum. By this time, we were exhausted. But added to that, our hearts were heavy because we had to leave the Louvre. And just when we were getting out, we saw the inverted pyramid. Once we got out of the Louvre, we just walked around aimlessly, something we hadn't done the past 2 evenings in Paris. We were looking at all the pretty Parisian cafes, the gorgeous, timeless buildings, and all these beautiful shops, all the pretty people dressed prettily. While we were walking around aimlessly, we ended up seeing the Opera Garnier building from outside, and we were enchanted by it. We were to go there the next day, but we still walked up and beheld it in the glorious evening light. By this time, a couple of women were giving away free cookies. We thanked them profusely and enjoyed our cookies watching Opera Garnier. And as the last of the daylight faded away, it was time for us to get back to our hotel because we still had an entire day left to be spent in Paris. I'll come back with that story in the next episode. Until then, take care. Bye.